Well students, today our topic is education in British India and growth of modern system of education after 1947 AD. While going through this topic, we will come to know about education in British era, Macaulays Minutes 1835, main features of Macaulays Minutes, recommendations of Wood's Dispatch, recommendations of Hunter Commission, educational system during 1898-1902, Sadler Commission 1917, Radhakrishnan Commission 1948, Mudaliar Commission 1952-53. Now, development of education system in India during British period. In pre-British period, Hindus and Muslims were educated through Pathshala and madrasas respectively. Britishers showed no interest in advancement of learning in the first stage of their rule in India. Some of the Britishers in personal endeavour and for political gain showed some interest in spreading education. Van Hastings, Governor General of Bengal, showed keen interest in Oriental education in India. Now, there was a debate about the line of expenditure. In the Charter Act of 1813, rupees 1 lakh per year was sanctioned for advancement of education. Some said that it should go for Oriental education, others said that the sum was to be spent for English education. The General Committee of Public Instruction decided to spend the money on Oriental studies. Thus, the decision was taken to establish a Sanskrit College at Calcutta. During the rule of Lord William Bentinck II, there was change in government's education policy. He appointed Thomas Bankton Macaulay, a renowned educationist and the chairman of Committee of Public Instruction. At that time, the committee was divided in the issue of European education. They were known as Orientalists, but people like T.B. Macaulay with Alexander Duff, Sanders and Colvin Extra were the supporters of European education. Macaulay presented a proposal of advancement of English education in 1835 AD. This was known as Macaulays Minutes. Macaulays Minutes. Since the dawn of 19th century, the General Committee or Public Instructions was divided on the question of educational policy, particularly regarding the medium of instruction. These differences, which had started in 1823, came to surface fully in 1834. The group that supported the policy and gave encouragement to Oriental literature were known as Orientalists. Those who supported the introduction of Western education and adoption of English as the medium of instruction were called Occidentalists. Lord Macaulay came in India as a law member of the Council of Governor General on 10th June 1934. He was a learned scholar of English literature and a very fluent orator. He was appointed as the chairman of the Society of Public Instructions of Bengal by Lord William Bentinck. At that time, a violent Oriental and Occidental controversy regarding medium of education in India was very evident. The Britishers were held up because they were unable to solve the problem of medium of instruction in India. This created situation for recurring inconvenient discussion at meetings. Almost every topic that came up for discussion in any meeting of the committee got mixed up with these fundamental differences. Both the parties in the committee decided to submit their dispute to Governor General in Council for orders. The situation became urgent when a sum of rupees 1 lakh was sanctioned by the British Parliament under 43rd section of the Charter Act of 1813 to be expanded every year for the revival and improvement of literature and the encouragement of the learned natives of India and for the introduction and promotion of knowledge of the sciences among the inhabitants of the British. Now, Wood's Dispatch. It's known to us that the Charter of East India Company had to be renewed after every 20 years. When the time for renewal came in 1853, education in India had come to suffer numerous problems. The directors of the company decided to lay down a definite policy for education in India. Therefore, it became necessary to make a comprehensive survey of the entire field of education. As such, a selection committee of the British Parliament was set up in order to institute an inquiry into the measures for their reforms. The committee studied the issue thoroughly and reported that the question of the Indian education should not be ignored and its development will not be in any case harmful to the British Empire. The suggestions of the committee were favorably considered by the Board of Directors. Sir Charles Wood was the president of the Board of Control. Therefore, the declaration issued on July 19, 1854 was known as Wood's Dispatch, although it is said that the dispatch was written by the famous thinker John Stuart Mill, a clerk of the company at that time. On the basis of the recommendations of the Wood's Dispatch, new educational policies were formed. Now, the recommendations. Wood's Dispatch is a long document of 100 paragraphs and deals with the various aspects of great educational importance. The dispatch had the following objectives in view: to impart Western knowledge, to educate the natives of India so that a class of public servants could be created, to promote intellectual development, expansion of mass education, establishment of universities, grant in aid system sanctioned for the Indian educational system. Now, Hunter Commission. After the transfer of administrative power from the East India Company, it was considered necessary to assess the development of education in the country. It was felt that the grant and aid system as suggested by Wood's Dispatch was not popularly carried out. Because of all this, the missionaries started an agitation and formed an organization in London, which was known as the General Council of Education in India. When Lord Ripon was appointed the Viceroy of India, a deputation of the General Council of Education requested him to have an inquiry into Indian education. Lord Ripon appointed the first Indian Education Commission on 1882. Sir William Hunter was appointed as the chairman of the commission. The commission was popularly known as Hunter Commission after the name of its chairman. Besides the chairman, the commission consists of 20 other members. Aims and objectives of commission. The commission was appointed with following aims: to inquire into the manner in which effect had been given to the principles of the Dispatch of 1854, to assess the position of primary education in India and to suggest measures for its reform, to inquire into the position of the state institutions and their importance, to evaluate the work of missionaries in the field of education, to inquire into government attitude towards private enterprise. The commission also undertook an inquiry into the conditions of secondary education and to suggest measures for its improvement. Accordingly, the commission made valuable recommendations for the development of primary education. Now, the education in British India second. Lord Curzon came to India in a very crucial period of Indian history. This was the beginning of 20th century and severe famine and epidemic of plague had crippled the social life of the people. Primary education was in a very bad shape, but with the establishment of the Indian National Congress in 1885, there was a revival of national spirit in the field of education. The people of the country started realizing the need for a system of education that would represent our national character. Several national leaders like B.G. Tilak, Anai Besant, C.R. Das, Dadabhai Naoroji and Gokhale had emerged and helped in the development of the spirit of nationalism. Lord Curzon came to India as Viceroy in 1899. During his period, India was revived very critically and steps were taken to improve the different levels of education. The first step in the educational reform that Lord Curzon initiated was the holding of a conference at Simla in September 1901. This was the first conference on all India basis. The conference was attended by the provincial directors of public instruction, representatives of the Christian missionaries, and a few selected educationists. But the representatives of the India remained absent. The conference continued for a fortnight. Lord Curzon himself presided over conference and took a very prominent part in drafting the resolution. All total 150 resolutions were passed, which were mostly unanimous and which covered all stages of Indian education from primary to university level. These resolutions formed the basis of the government resolution of 1904 on education policy. The government identified the shortcomings of Indian education and the major policy decisions were as follows. The government should fully control all stages of education. The government should spend more money on education. Government schools should serve as models to private schools. Curzon's contribution to Indian education. Lord Curzon was severely criticized in his days. He failed to create faith and confidence in the minds of educated Indians. They thought that this reform had some deep political motives. For the socio-political condition of the country in those days, it was not possible to evaluate Curzon's activities in an objective and impartial manner. But now it is admitted that Lord Curzon did human service to the cause of Indian education. During his days, every aspect of education received his keen attention, and it was Lord Curzon who started the movement for educational reconstruction in India, laid the foundation of the reforms of Indian universities, tried to raise the standard of Indian higher education. Standards of secondary education were also raised through rigid and regular inspection. Expansion of primary education was striking. Technical and vocational education received impetus in his hands. Reforms were also introduced in agriculture education. His attempt to preserve the ancient monuments of India and creation of a department on archaeology was praiseworthy. Now the Sadler Commission. The government actually felt the necessity of investigating into the affairs of university education in 1914. Accordingly, a proposal was taken to reform the Indian universities under the leadership of Lord Haldane. But the proposal was not carried into effect due to the outbreak of the First World War. In 1917, the government appointed the Calcutta University Commission to study and report on the problem of university education. The commission is also known as Sadler Commission after the name of its chairman, Dr. Macaulays Sadler. The commission visited all the university centers and after 17 months submitted its report in 1919. The report consists of 13 volumes giving a critical and comprehensive survey of educational problems of secondary, college and university education in India. Although it deals with the Calcutta University only, the problem that is tied were more or less common to the other Indian universities also. The suggestions therefore were equally applicable to other universities in the country. Hence, the report of the commission had far-reaching consequences upon the development of university education in India as a whole. Recommendations. In the opinion of the commission of the Calcutta University had assumed a huge dimension in the form of its various affiliated educational institutions. So, it remarked that it was impossible for the university to perform its task successfully. The commission therefore recommended that the commission laid emphasis on the teaching functions of universities. The number of trained teachers should be increased without any delay. Education should be taught as an independent subject in both intermediate and in B.A. classes. Co-education should be encouraged in those places where there were no separate institutions for the girls. Professional and vocational courses should be introduced in the universities. The Calcutta University Commission laid special emphasis on the development of modern Indian languages and on the study of vernacular at different stages of education. Now, Varda scheme. The Varda scheme of education, popularly known as basic education, occupies a unique place in the field of elementary education in India. This scheme was the first attempt to develop an indigenous scheme of education in British India by Mahatma Gandhi, the father of our nation. At Round Table Conference in London, he pointed out the ineffectiveness of the system of primary education in India and the alarming low percentage of literacy among the Indian people. He put the British government responsible for the painful situation in the field of mass education. For the purpose of discussing different aspects of the proposed new scheme of education, an All India Education Conference was held in Varda on 22nd and 23rd October 1937. The eminent educationists, Congress leaders and workers along with the education ministers of the 7 states had attended the conference. Gandhiji himself presided over it. After serious discussions, the following 4 resolutions were passed. Free and compulsory education be provided on a nationwide scale. That the medium of instruction be the mother tongue. That the process of education through this period should center around some form of manual productive work suitable for the local condition. That the system of education will be gradually able to cover the remuneration of the teacher. Now its surgeon report. As the British became hopeful of its victory in Second World War, it directed its attention to do something for the Indian people in the field of education. So it advises Sir John Sargent, the educational advisor to the Government of India, to prepare a comprehensive scheme of education for educational reform in India. This scheme has a historical importance as it was the first attempt to develop a national system for education in India. The report was a full-fledged educational plan for the future educational reconstruction in India. The report had diagnosed every problem critically and had given definite and clear-cut solutions. It deals with almost all types of education for all classes of people in India. It had made certain policy decisions, the implications of which may have far-reaching consequences. They may be outlined below. Pre-primary education for children between 3 to 6 years of age, universal, compulsory and free primary or basic education for all children between the ages 6 to 11 and 11 to 14. High school education for 6 years for selected children between the years 11 to 17. Degree course for 3 years beginning after the higher secondary examination for selected students. Technical, commercial, agriculture and art education for full-time and part-time students. Full provision for the proper training of teachers. The creation of employment bureaus. The creation of Department of Education in the center and in the states. Now education in post-independent era. Radhakrishnan Commission. After independence, the first significant step taken by the Government of India in the field of education was the appointment of the University Education Commission in 1948 under the chairmanship of Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan, a distinguished scholar and former Vice Chancellor of Banaras Hindu University. The commission was appointed by the Government of India to go into the problems and prospects of Indian university education and to suggest improvements and extensions that might be considered desirable to suit the present and future requirements of the country. The commission was appointed in November 1948 and it submits its report in August 1949. It is the duty of a university to preserve and develop the culture and civilization of the land. The university should generate new ideas and discard those which are likely to prevent the growth of the nation. The university should provide opportunities to acquire all kinds of knowledge. The university has to make the foundation of democracy strong, and it has to develop the spirit in students for ensuring equality, fraternity, and social justice to all while maintaining the integrity of the nation. The universities have to provide leadership in politics, administration, education, industry, and commerce. Now, Mudaliar Commission. Secondary education is the stage of education that includes all the classes after the primary school and is considered to be the backbone of the country's entire educational program. This, however, is also the stage which marks the completion of education for the large majority of pupils. Secondary education is also the basis of higher education, which gives the desired direction to the nation's power. After achieving the independence in 1947, both the public and the government began to take the keen interest in the development of secondary education. Meanwhile, the attainment of independence, the political situation of the country also underwent a complete transformation. The Central Advisory Board of Education at its 14th meeting held in January 1948 recommended the appointment of a commission to examine the prevailing system of secondary education in the country and to suggest measures for its reorganization and improvement. In view of these considerations, the Government of India set up the Secondary Education Commission under the chairmanship of Dr. A. Lakshman Swamy Mudaliar, the Vice Chancellor of Madras University. Therefore, this commission is also known as Mudaliar Commission. The commission was inaugurated on 6th October 1952. It submitted its report on June 1953. Recommendations. The commission had made the following recommendations: development of democratic citizenship, improvement of vocational efficiency, education for leadership, development of personality. Now, Qatari Commission. Qatari Education Commission 1964-66, which was the 6th commission in the history of commission in India. The commission was appointed under provision of a resolution of the Government of India dated 14th July 1964. Dr. D.S. Qatari, chairman of the UGC, was appointed as the chairman of the commission. Therefore, it is also known as Qatari Commission. Among the members of the commission, 5 educationists were from England, America, France, Japan, and Russia. Recommendations. Education has a very extensive role to play in changing the men and society. It has to be entirely reformed and related to the life, needs, and aspirations of the people so that it may serve as a powerful tool of social, economic, and cultural transformation. In order to relate education, the Commission recommended the following objectives: increase in productivity, promoting social and national integration, education and modernization, developing social, moral, and spiritual values. The Commission recommended a new structural pattern of education. The new educational structure should be as 1 to 3 years of preschool education, a primary stage of 7 to 8 years divided into a lower primary stage of 4 or 5 years, and a higher primary stage of 3 or 2 years. A lower secondary stage of 3 or 2 years of general education, or 1 to 3 years of vocational education. The structural pattern thus recommended by the Commission is commonly known as 10 plus 2 plus 3. Now, National Policy of Education. The National Policy of Education of 1986 is a result of the review which was discussed and adopted during the budget session of 1985 when Rajiv Gandhi was the Prime Minister of India. Again, a committee was set up under the chairmanship of Acharya Ramamurthy in May 1990 to review national policy of education and to make recommendations for its modifications. This committee submitted its report in January 1992, which is known as National Programme of Action of 1992. This policy aimed to promote national progress, a sense of common citizenship and culture, and to strengthen national integration. It laid stress on the need for a radical reconstruction of the education system to improve its quality at all the stages, and therefore gave much greater attention to science and technology, the cultivation of moral values, and a closer relation between education and the life of the people. The main objective of the National Policy of Education of 1986 was to establish a national system of education which implies that all students, irrespective of caste, creed, sex and religion, have access to education of a comparable quality. The major objectives of National Policy of Education 1986 are mainly universal access and enrollment, universal retention of children up to 14 years of age, and a sustainable improvement in the quality education. The basic objectives of the National Policy of Education of 1986 and Programme of Action of 1992 emphasized that education must play a positive and interventionist role in correcting social and regional imbalance, empowering women, securing rightful place for the minorities. The educational policy, as highlighted in the NPE, also emphasized on enhancing and promoting the vocationalization of education, adult education, education for the mentally and physically challenged persons, non-formal education, open universities and distance learning, early childhood care and education. With this, we come to the end of today's topic. Hope you have enjoyed and understood the lecture. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.